we're going to leverage each other's ideas, competences, uh, and work together in a collaborative way. And there's quite a remarkable person that I met recently on a virtual call like ours today. And he's doing something. I was just so inspired. And I said, hey, as you can see on the website here, we're talking about the world's first competence discovery tool. What is that? And how can this impact our lives as human beings? So I'm going to introduce you to Sean Hinton, who has had a remarkable corporate career, a lot of corporate responsibility and career path, and now he built this fantastic AI startup in the human resource and competence discovery space. So I said, hey, Sean, why don't you come on our call here and tell us your story? How do you go from a corporate career to do something like this? Why, and what is it you're building here? So with that, I'm going to introduce to Sean and hand over to Sean to tell us about this journey and what's Skyhive all about. Sean, welcome and good morning. Just going to see if I can unmute you.
I'm unmuted.
Okay, cool. How are you, Sean?
Doing very well, thanks. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. So I am going to dive right into my presentation. Just give me a second to share my screen.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is.
And then there's share screen. Yeah, there we go. There we go. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Now we can see it, Sean.
There we are.
There we are.
Okay, so I'm going to take you on a little bit of a storytelling here, and I've tried to combine this presentation to both share my experience, talk a little bit about Skyhive, talk a little bit about the future of work, and leave a few nuggets of inspiration for aspiring entrepreneurs. And so hopefully I achieve that goal with my presentation. So I'm going to first start about talking about my path. And my path began out of university. I joined an organization called the Association of Canadian Community Colleges. And the association was the national association in Canada that supported 400 vocational institutions and community colleges across the country. It's an interesting group for several reasons, but what's most interesting is that in Canada we have such a vast geography and such different communities, whether you're talking about up north in the Northwest Territories in the Yukon, or you're talking about urban centers in Toronto and Vancouver. And so vocational institutions have been established in Canada to really focus on local community economic development. And so you get this broad spectrum of understanding of what's going on in industry and with learners across the country. And so my work spans helping agricultural farmers in Paraguay, doing motorcycle safety training in India, and working with the establishment of what we call the Sector Council program. And so this was the first time in the Canadian government's history that we brought human resource leaders across the country together. They put down their swords and shields, And they got in a room and said, we really have to get a national understanding of what our industry is, what our occupational categories are. And I went through, several hours of competency mapping, competency profiling. Unbeknownst to me, that would lead to where we are today. But obviously that's part of the story. So from there, I was recruited by the CEO of Vancouver Community College. Vancouver Community College at that time was the largest community college outside of one other college in Toronto. Vancouver Community College it's headquartered in the downtown east side of Vancouver, which for those of you who are familiar with Vancouver, it's a significant at-risk community. There's a lot of homelessness, a lot of drug abuse. And Vancouver Community College was an exemplary organization at serving the needs of Indigenous communities, of new immigrants to Canada, and obviously the at-risk communities on the downtown east side. And so I served as chief of staff to the CEO and board, and spent time on the ground working with those communities. Then, unbeknownst to me, my life would take a very different turn, and I ended up in the private sector. I joined a company called Whitewater. Whitewater is the world's largest water park company. So for those of you who have been to Disney or to Atlantis or on cruise ships, Whitewater has most likely made that the attractions that you and your families have enjoyed. And so I started at Whitewater with basically a role that they made for me called Business Pursuit Champion, which basically consisted of me sitting at a desk until somebody gave me some work. And then I would then be asked to go and build out the international markets. So I spent 3 years living in Europe, building out the markets in Russia, Middle East, Europe, India, and Africa. And then I moved over to Shanghai and built out the Asian markets. And then I would come back and take on the role of president of the company. And at that time, the company was a $250 million global company with 500 employees, 23 global offices. And it was probably one of the most exemplary companies in the country with respect to international trade. So we had a very complex global supply chain that was all over the world and operating 24/7. And so really interesting experience. And so I call this phase the golden handcuff phase. You can imagine a 34-year-old president of one of the largest exporting companies in the province of British Columbia. I had a fantastic job. I had lots of adoration. I had lots of authority. And I call that the golden handcuffs. And what's interesting when I look back on the path, and I define the path as the collection of experiences you will have that lead you to your purpose. And I'm going to get into purpose in a second. For some, the path is like super easy. If you're Mark Zuckerberg, you get this idea at Harvard, and a few years later you're a billionaire. But for most, and when I mean most, I mean 99.999%, the path is far more arduous. And it's interesting looking back on the collection of experiences as if those experiences were predefined and were supposed to happen. And you'll understand this better when I begin to talk about what Skyhive is, because why would someone who by osmosis was gaining this information in his early 20s on skills and competencies somehow start building water slides and then end up building an AI company? And so this is where the path is very interesting. And so for each of you, you're on your path. There's a collection of experiences that have trailed behind you, and where are those experiences leading with respect to focus on your purpose? And so finding purpose, there are three images on the screen. One of I've had the great opportunity over my 17-year career to travel the world. And one of my favorite cities, bar none, was Damascus. Excuse me. And I had the opportunity to visit Damascus before what you see on the left happened. And this is the Syrian civil conflict, and I'll get into the reasons why, played a big part in me finding my purpose. On the right-hand side, Kofi Annan, who passed away last year, also played a big role. And in the middle are these two little guys who are my 4.5-year-old twins. Now, I will seldom, if ever, talk about this publicly, but both of my little guys have pretty severe health conditions, and one of them will require sort of lifelong support, additional support. And these three elements are what led me to finding my purpose. So here I am with my golden handcuffs. I'm at a CEO conference in Dubai. We're exploring the Middle East conflicts in a closed room with a whole bunch of thought leaders from the region. And a group of Syrian women have a panel in the morning sessions, and they talk about the atrocities of the treatment of women during the Civil War. Now, for me, as a North American businessman, I was not seeing this information in the media. This completely shattered me. It literally changed the trajectory of my life in 1 hour of a panel. And these amazing, remarkable women who were able to get through to me to find my purpose started this. A few hours later, the man on the right would challenge us as CEOs he said a couple of things, and I think I can speak pretty freely about this now. He said a couple of things. First, he said his experience with the UN taught him that humanitarian aid organizations are very narrow and limited in terms of their ability to impact sustainable change outside of the scope of work that they deal with. So they do an amazing job and are incredible organizations, but they're very narrow and limited. Governments, for the most part, are focused on 5-year timeframes and not necessarily looking at long-term sustainability. And really, the people who can change the world are entrepreneurs. They're the ones who have the access to capital. They're the ones who have longevity. They have the energy. They have the ability to build networks and seek, political influence and other types of influence. And so if they really put their minds to it, they can truly change the world. And then in the middle part, having the experiences of my little guys just put me in a different mindset. And these three things coming together in one day at one moment put me in a very different trajectory. And I decided to take off my golden handcuffs and move forward. So, when I try and define purpose, this is my definition of purpose. So purpose lives in our hearts, not in our heads. It's a passionate love affair with something that is greater than ourselves. Because of this deep, deep love, we're not worried of whether we succeed or fail, and we're not worried whether the world accepts or rejects our purpose. We're willing to give everything we have to our purpose, regardless of what that outcome looks like. We will not be satisfied with anything else but serving our purpose. So from that day forward, that moment in Dubai, I had my purpose, and I was not going to be satisfied until I began serving that purpose. And I'm happy to explore that in Q&A, but this is my definition of purpose. So what was my purpose? My purpose was to help people better understand their gifts, talents, and abilities, and how they can develop and use those to further their quest for livelihood and economic empowerment. This is the first part. The reason why this was my purpose was that if I could somehow help that Syrian situation, and I thought about what my backgrounds were, what my experience was, if I could somehow help that situation, my understanding of the world, earlier in my career, I spent a great amount of time with people in impoverished situations, in at-risk situations. Later in my career, I spent time with extremely wealthy real estate developers, and there was a broad spectrum. And what I realized was that the commonality, regardless of where you are in the world or regardless of your economic class, is that everybody has talents and gifts and abilities. They just don't know how to actually necessarily, A, they don't know what they are, and B, they don't know how to actually contribute those to the world. And so that was the first part of the purpose. The second part was to build a company that could be wildly successful from all traditional standards, from a profit and loss perspective, but delivering equal or greater social impact along the way. And so really that was the establishment of Skyhive. I've debated whether or not I'm going to play a video because of bandwidth issues. Lars, I'm happy to solicit your opinion on that. I'm happy to share the link in the chat, and then people can check it out after.
Sure.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll share the link after. Otherwise, we're going to get a whole bunch of choppiness. Is that
okay? Let's do that. Okay.
Okay. And so basically, what is Skyhive? What I began to examine was here now the path unfolds for me. So my early stage of my path, I spent a lot of time manually doing competency mapping, and so I understood the process of taking an occupation, breaking that occupation down into a work breakdown, and then looking at the skills, both hard skills and soft skills that come out of those work breakdowns. And at the time, and this was sort of early 2016, we were now beginning to see the access to computing power and the increase of computing power, as well as the reduction of cost. And so in a cloud-based world, we could begin to examine machine learning, deep learning in a way that was relatively cost efficient. And so my partner and I came together, and we started what we call alpha, so just early stage hypotheses that we had. We started looking at how can we, if we asked people to participate and provide their skills outside of what they do for a living or what their education is, would they be interested in doing that? And so sure enough, we went on, we posted some challenges on a website that we made. We organically took in 300 users, and we asked questions like, about autonomous cars and trying to get passion out of people. And so we would get answers from, executive assistants at real estate companies that had interesting technology ideas for the car of the future. Or we would get people that were interested in contributing to things that they had absolutely, if you looked at their resume, no interest in, or no competency in actually providing expertise to. The other interesting part is that we had cash incentives for the winners of these challenges, because we actually had clients that were using this platform to basically crowdsource innovation and interesting ideas, and people wouldn't accept cash. And these are people in impoverished countries. In one case, we had a woman from the rural Philippines who had a $300 US cash prize, and she turned it down. And so it was really interesting to see that when you actually begin to tap people's passions and gifts, that they're actually voluntarily willing to give it to the world. And so this is Skyhive. Now, the video that I'll share will explain the user experience, but basically what we do is we use artificial intelligence to extract skills from people. We use artificial intelligence to extract skills from jobs to be done. And then we match those in the most efficient way. The application of our technology is being used by governments and multinationals in a variety of ways. One is looking at the aging workforce. And so you have this bubble of an aging workforce, you have a pretty narrow funnel of a middle workforce, and then you have a bubble of an early stage workforce. So it's looking at taking the skills of the aging workforce, making sure that the new workforce is receiving those skills, and ensuring relevancy for that aging workforce. We're working with major corporation on impact-based hiring. So they're not satisfied with just hiring people for technical skills. They've created a profile of what they consider to be an impact employee, and they want to make sure that the people coming into the organization are suitable for driving impact, flexibility, agility, innovation, teamwork, etc. And then maybe a third example would be a major car company in Germany. So they have a strategy for 2023. Obviously, the car industry is one of the most interesting transitionary industries right now in terms of the movement away from combustible engines and towards autonomous vehicles. They have a skill set for 2023 that's very different than the skill set they have today, and this is specific to their R&D team. And so we extract the skills of the future, we extract the skills of the present, we find gaps, and we provide adaptive learning pathways for those folks to become upskilled in order to take on the jobs of the future. So in all of these cases, we're driving knowledge and efficiency to the worker side or the learner side, and then also efficiency to the client side. So the chapter 3, I talk about the hero's journey, and some of you may be familiar with this. Once we've found our purpose, and we can call for in the case of this example, call to adventure, purpose, entrepreneurs are going to go on a hero's journey, and the hero's journey is completely inevitable and unavoidable. And the hero's journey can be looked at in a macro sense in terms of you're taking a new idea and building it out. But there's many hero journeys that exist within everything that we're doing every day. So think about the last time you had a relationship with someone, or the last time you were negotiating something for a sale, or all of these have micro heroes journeys, but inevitably the entrepreneur is going to go through this process. And really, this is where I see, in terms of my experience, people fall off and not be able to succeed on what Lars would call an exponential journey. Because the harder the impact, or the bigger the impact, in my opinion, the road of trials is going to be even bigger. And so let's say we get our purpose, we get a call to adventure. Everything is fantastic. You're on a high. You're just enjoying working on what you're doing. You're going to cross the threshold into the road of trials. The road of trials is going to be comprised of battles. There will be things that wound you, that hurt you, that make you want to quit. There will be things that are the most amazing good news stories you've ever heard. You will meet people along this road of trials. People will try to take advantage of you. They may try to help you. And you need to navigate this process, and it's going to create a bunch of battle scars. Now, I draw purpose here because when those bad days come, and the road of trials is not just bad, there's good and bad. There's fantastically amazing, and there's horrible, and there's everything in between. When the bad days come, for me, it's been rooting myself in my purpose. Why am I doing this in the first place? And going back to that love affair that I have with solving this problem. And that's the only thing that's going to keep me going during those times and get me to brush myself off and get back up. At some point, there's going to be an abyss. That abyss is the lowest part of this journey. The abyss is you're either going to jump or you're not going to jump. And if you're not going to jump, you're going to get lost in the road of trials, and you'll continue to circle around in the road of trials, or you'll pass through the abyss. When you pass through the abyss, you will have collected an unbelievable amount of strength that you will have learned from your collection of experiences on the road of trials, and that will begin to transition you into coming out of the hero's journey into the ultimate boon. In other words, you're going towards meeting the goal. You've done that because you are a very different person at this point than you were at the call to adventure, far more different than you ever think you're going to be. And once you have that ultimate boon, you then begin to return that. You give it back to society, you give it back to your network. The road of trials is best navigated by mentors and advisors and the collection of people that you're going to meet along the way. And it's that village of people that come together, and I have some amazing people with us on the call this morning from Skyhive who have joined these Road of Trials, and they experienced this with me. Without them, I wouldn't be able to do this. So that's the only way to get through through to the other side of the abyss. So this was my best way of sort of graphically showing the hero's journey. So navigating the hero's journey, if you stay true to your purpose, that village will form around you. For those who go away from their purpose, I often see they're the ones that fail. They're just not authentic, and people will not form a village around something that is not authentic. It will greatly increase your chances of successfully crossing the abyss, and I warn, to attempt the journey alone, you do so at your peril. So the future of work, I'm going to classify for this talk as the hero's journey of industrialism. And so this is what some will call the fourth industrial revolution. We've had 3 before it, and if you examine those 3 before it, you will see a hero's journey that happened as those industrial revolutions took place. You had this incredible amount of energy around new technology, new ideas, new thinking. You go into a road of trials where people begin to realize that things aren't all they're shaped up to be. Humanity has to come to an abyss where it decides, is it going to jump or is it going to get stuck in the road of trials? And then you begin to see an unbelievable amount of abundance on the other side. And this story has remained the same for every single industrial revolution. I define this industrial revolution of the deepening of the relationship between humanity and machine for the purposes of production. And so what does that mean? Well, that has implications with governments. That has implications with training organizations. It has implications with society, and obviously big implications and responsibilities for employers. So the question is not, do we need to change? The question is, we are changing, and industry is going to drive us to that change. Economic growth is going to drive us to that change. And frankly, our planet is driving us to that change in terms of climate change and environmental impacts. We also have a responsibility now, given what we know about the world, to know that the production may be increasing, but so is the gap between the rich and the poor. And it's just simply not an excuse anymore. We have enough technology, enough knowledge, and we're connected enough to know that there are a million innovations that are going to be created that can help drive abundance to our situation here. And so in the case of Skyhive, that's sort of our foray into trying to drive that change. So my challenge to this group is to start with articulating your purpose, and not in an academic way, because an academic way is not a deep love affair. An academic way is just words that you write down because you've been asked to. What is that passionate love affair? What is that one thing that, regardless of success or failure, acceptance or rejection, that you're going to get up every day and love to work on? And hopefully through this sprint, and Lars and the community you'll find that and be able to drive some amazing new thinking and amazing new innovation to helping the world get better educated. Thanks.
Sean, thank you so much. I wanted this to go on for a couple of more hours, Sean, but let me just read out some questions that have been posted for you here, Sean. So the first one is from Dan. How does Skyhive define social impact?
How does Skyhive define social impacts? So first of all, we're responsible to our internal community. So the Skyhive team, we're responsible for making sure that, you know, my goal is that they have, regardless of success or failure, that they have the absolute time of their career and that they learn everything they can. The next part is we are very focused on local community impact, because we don't want to talk about helping the world if we're not willing to help our own community. And so we have a number of initiatives as a company where we participate in local community impact. Probably at a product level, the most important part for us, and this is really the second part of my purpose, we apply our technology to 6 at-risk groups, and we focus on community partnerships and government partnerships and with 6 at-risk groups. These are the groups that, you know, today in North America, they talk about the lowest unemployment rate in 40 years. But when you turn to page 2, you see drastic issues within specific groups, and that would be women, youth, newcomers, in our case, indigenous communities, and in the US, it would be Latino communities, veterans that are transitioning from military to civilian society, and the physically disabled. These communities, we have a collection of community partnerships with groups like Key to Enable, which is another Singularity venture company, the Boys and Girls Clubs, Destination Imagination. And we focus on helping drive knowledge, information, and awareness to those 6 groups, and using our technology to better support access to skills discovery, training, and employment. So that's on the products or on the company side. And so we very much have 2 pillars. One is our focus as a traditional technology company, and the other is our focus on social impact.
Awesome, thank you. A question from Laura here. Does Skyhive work in Syria?
Skyhive is currently in discussions. We're working with the World Food Program. I can't talk about specifics, but
sure.
The answer is, let's just call it yes-ish.
Yes, so. Cool. Okay. Okay. I hope, Laura, that's good enough for now. Then a question from Jerry. What evidence does Skyhive's AI find most useful to infer someone's skills, especially the more subtle skills that you mentioned?
Can you repeat that question? I'm not sure.
Sure. It's a long question here. So, what evidence does Skyhive's AI find most useful to infer someone's skills, especially the more subtle skills that you mentioned?
Yeah, I think probably the most useful information is that we're able to see in real time what the labor market is doing. So, for example, if somebody today is a graphic designer and they have typically a very narrow understanding of what they're able to do in the labor market. On the company side, it's the same. So roughly it's about 40%. So if a company put together a job description for a graphic designer, they would get about 40% of what's happening in the labor market. If a person put their resume or profile together for a graphic designer, it'd be about 40% of what's available in the labor market. So I think probably the most useful information for people is to see, how the labor market is changing and how jobs are changing, but also what skills within their profile are in demand and becoming sort of in surplus. Then they're able to know, okay, how do I focus on getting the right new skills or upskilled to take on the relevant movements of the labor market.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And there's a big applause for you also here from several of our community members, just trying to pass that on to you. What age range are you gathering competencies for?
We're age agnostic. So for us, it's extremely important for our technology. We're extremely diligent about objectivity. And so we don't look at gender. We don't look at age. We don't look at ethnicity. We simply look at competency and competency level. And you know, because you could be 18 years old and be a genius expert at Python. We have no, you know, so we get away from any notion of bias.
Right. Cool. Here's another big thank you to you for your honesty and transparency. And from Maria here, hi Sean, do you have any advice on building strong team culture around a purpose? That's a brilliant question.
You know, I don't want to speak for my team because I think my team is best suited to answer this question. I sort of sit on the inside of this discussion out, and the team sits on the outside in. For us, we have a very strong set of core values, and those core values, that's what we operate by as a team. Some of those core values, first of all, we're egoless. And so that's one of our core values. We approach each other with honest transparency. So it can be quite, I don't want to say brutal, but we're quite open with each other, and we do it in a way that's respectful. So what I find in my experience, though, is that, again, core values are often an academic exercise. You get a consultant that comes into a company, they spend a few days with some whiteboards, and there's some, like, you know, small groups, and people kind of write stuff down. For us, it's extremely different. Our core values are discussed pretty much on a weekly basis, and we call each other out when there's any misalignment to those. So I think there's the articulation of those core values, but then there's actually living by them and holding each other accountable to them. So I would hope that I would do my team justice in explaining that that's an accurate representation of how we maintain our culture.
It's a good advice, right? And we're all trying to do our best to live up to it, definitely. Great. I think we'll just do one more question here, and then maybe we can take a few questions through the microphone if anybody else have questions. Let me see. Jabin has a question here. Can you elaborate on how you ID and match people to jobs of the future that we are not yet aware of, given the accelerating pace of change? How do you ID and match people to jobs of the future?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question, because there's in our world, in Skyhive's world, we don't see jobs of the future. We see clusters of skills of the future. And so what we do see is the definition of a job is all over the place. You know, whether you're a digital innovation manager, a digital innovation, you know, supervisor, you know, there's a plethora of job titles for effectively the same role when you boil it down to skills. And so what we do see are the clusters of skills that are more in demand than others. And then it's simply just a matter of algorithmic matching to the skill sets that folks have. There's also a natural line to, for example, the job architect. Well, the job architect could be an urban architect, it could be a landscape architect, or it could be a software architect. And so we're spending a lot of time understanding and breaking those things apart with respect to competencies. And I think the first part of that contemplation is getting rid of this notion of jobs. It's not a requirement of the future. It will be a collection of skills, of competencies, whatever you want to call them. Beyond Skyhive, it will be a collection of behavioral attributes and inherent characteristics that people have as well, right? And so I know that's not a real clear answer to the question, but that's sort of, we see it a little bit more differently in terms of the future paradigm.
Awesome. I think, yeah. Sorry, Jabin, or who was it?
No, I was just saying thank you. That's fascinating. It's awesome.
It is fascinating. I love the different way of approaching the challenge, thinking about the competencies rather than the jobs. So I think that's a great inspiration for all of us as we start to develop our ideas and take our ideas through the sprint process starting next month. Brilliant. This is the word that kind of summarizes a lot of the feedback for your session here, Sean. We will have to wrap this part of our session now, given the time limitations for today. So I just wanted, on behalf of everybody, to say a big thank you, Sean, for getting up in the morning time in Vancouver and presenting to us with such enthusiasm and energy. So maybe everybody who wants to unmute themselves and give a big applause to Sean, I'm very welcome to do so.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lars, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Sean.